Code review is the skill that can take your hacking to the next level, especially when you know in which software to look for bugs. And today, I'm joined by Shubs, who knows this better than anyone else. Enjoy the interview. Hello, Shubs. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about bug bounty and your hacking tips. For those of you who don't know you, how did you start with hacking? What's your background?
Yeah, sure. So I started hacking when I was maybe 12, 13 years old. One of the things that drew me into hacking was just because my dad had bought us a computer, and my brother and we used to play online games together. But my brother used to always beat me at these games, which really sucked. And I really wanted to get either good enough at these games or figure out a way to beat my brother. So I got into game hacking initially. I looked into making things like undetectable cheat engines to bypass anti-game cheat detection, and also looked into things like aimbots and things like that for the different online games that we were playing. When I was about 13, I also realized that there's this field of web application security, and that was really something that I only realized after connecting with people in the game hacking scene. And from there, I was able to really develop a passion and interest in web application security specifically. And that passion and interest has basically come through all the way until now. That's something that I've heavily specialized in. That's something that I spend almost all my time in when it comes to information security. And yeah, basically from game hacking and getting into web application security, I eventually got into bug bounties. But the story is essentially that when I was around 14 years old, I was working at Hungry Jack's, which is the equivalent of Burger King in other countries. I was making like $6.50 an hour, which isn't really a lot of money to be making, but at the time, I come from an immigrant family. We didn't have that much money. It was still an incredible opportunity for me, but I was also doing bug bounties as much as I could at the time. And at this time, there was no HackerOne or BugCrowd really. Maybe they were just getting started off. But there was Microsoft and PayPal's bug bounty. And I was submitting bugs to PayPal. A lot of the bugs had almost no security impact. However, one day I came across a server-side request forgery bug that affected Bill Me Later, which is one of PayPal's acquisitions. And at this time, PayPal was running their own bug bounty. It was not managed by any platform or anything like that. And I submitted it, and they paid 1.5k USD. At the time, I had been working at Hungry Jack's for 8 months, and I'd only made like $800 Australian. So
Oh, wow.
when I got that bug bounty, I basically never showed up to Hungry Jack's again.
Did you literally the same day?
Yes, literally, I
Nice.
never showed up to Hungry Jack's again because it was very difficult work, and it was very hard work, and making $6.50 an hour, it was not really worth it when I could just spend time focusing on improving my skills in application security and specifically finding vulnerabilities for bug bounties. So along the way, I participated in a lot of different bug bounties initially, just for the Hall of Fame initially, but eventually I got into the hacking platforms like the bug bounty platforms like HackerOne and BugCrowd, and yeah, since then I've just been focusing on high-paying bug bounties.
Did you, for how long did you then stay doing bug bounty for full time?
Yeah, so I was still in school at that time, so I was still, I guess, balancing schoolwork and doing bug bounty work, but it was something that I did pretty consistently. Didn't make that much money, to be honest. In the first couple years of my bug bounty journey, I don't think I made anything close to what I've been making in the last few years in the bug bounty scene. But I was balancing, obviously, my high school work and trying to get into university and things like that, but full time, I've only done bug bounty while I was living in Europe, when I was living in Poland, in Krakow. So I did full time bug bounty for around a year when I was living in Europe. But yeah, along the way, I mean, I had a lot of opportunities here in Australia, which I'm very grateful for. When I was 17 and I had finished high school, I had sent an email to all of the pen test consultancies in my city, and I'd asked them whether or not they would be willing to accept an intern. And I think the fact that I had submitted to a lot of bug bounty programs really helped with that cold email outreach. And one of the security firms in Australia did come back to me and said that they'd be interested in doing an interview. I'd passed that interview, and then I joined as an intern. Unfortunately, it was a unpaid internship, so I didn't get paid anything, but I worked there for around 6 months. And I learned as much as I could about consulting and pen testing and all of that. And that was a very invaluable experience for me at 17 years old. After that, I worked at Atlassian as a contractor, where I found one security issue a day for 30 days. And then I worked at Ernst & Young as a consultant, working in basically any security related projects. And I was probably around 18 at that time. And finally, I ended up working at Bishop Fox, which was a US company that focuses on offensive security consulting. And I was there for 2 years, ending up as a senior security consultant. After that, I then co-founded my company that I have now.
What were your favorite places in Krakow? Because for those of you who don't know, right now I'm in Poland, I'm in Krakow, which is exactly the city that Shubs mentioned. Shubs in Australia, we have 10-hour time difference, so we are pretty much as far from each other as we can be, but turned out that he lived in the city that I'm living now. So what were your favorite places?
In Krakow, I don't remember the names exactly, but there was a place that Julia used to always take us to where they had all these different types of vodka shots. There was like a few of them in Krakow City. I forget the exact name, but...
probably pijalnia wódki I piwa on the Chef's Street.
That's probably it.
Likely.
There's also a place called Multiculti, which is... it's got all types of different beers, like maybe 30 beers on tap or something, which is incredible. And a really nice spot to just hang out, maybe just go with a few friends to the smoking area, drink some beers, have a few cigarettes. That's definitely one of the areas that I spent a lot of time at. I guess generally with Krakow, it was just, I loved the scenery of Krakow. I loved walking in the park, loved seeing all the beautiful green trees, and going to the cafe every morning and going to all these different bars, and the nightlife was phenomenal. The people were quite good as well, so it was a great experience. I mean, I definitely look back on those memories fondly, but I think there was a bit too much drinking going on to remember all the names of the places that I went to.
Yeah, but it's great also. I've just been before this podcast, half an hour in the park, very, very sunny day, very green to chill out, and I really, really like it. Now at AssetNote, do you still do hacking, or do you do something else?
Yeah, I still do hacking. So at the moment, I'm managing our security research team. So we have a team of 3 people, excluding me, so it's 4 people total. And basically, we take apart enterprise software, we find 0 days in them, and we ultimately do this to find vulnerabilities that we can check for in our platform inside AssetNote. And all of our customers, they get basically an advanced notification of any of these 0 days that affect their infrastructure. The really good news is that because we have so many customers at AssetNote, we can use that information and that data that we have to make really informed decisions about which technologies we should go after. We only really go after technologies that are being ran by our customers. So if we notice that a customer is running XYZ enterprise product, we will, obtain a copy of that, reverse engineer it, find 0 days, and add it to our platform. So it is something that we actively do for all of our customers. These days at AssetNote, it's a mix between a lot of things. As a co-founder, I wear a lot of hats. I do a lot of customer support. I do a lot of engineering, and I do a lot of security research. So those are the 3 main things that I focus on at AssetNote. And really, I'm not afraid to do anything necessary to move the business forward. So, some days I might be doing 6 hours of customer support work, and that's fine. Like, I'm happy to do that. That's no big deal. I think that by me being able to provide this information and support to our customers, there's not that many products that are doing that sort of work. So it does differentiate us, I think, greatly from our competitors. That even the CTO is doing support work.
Which activities are your favorite?
Which is what my favorite? Sorry.
Which activities that you mentioned are your favorite?
Definitely security research. That's by far my favorite. I do a lot of security research with our team, and managing a security research team also is quite interesting, because not only do you have to figure out the targets for the team to go after, you also have to do a lot of the work to set up everything in a way that minimizes the amount of time taken for the team to get started with this sort of stuff. So often I am finding myself setting up enterprise software and I guess getting everything ready, but I do also spend a lot of time actually working with my team, finding the vulnerabilities as well. What I've found is with adding more people to the security research team at Asset Note, the chances and likelihood of exploitation of harder to exploit issues has gone down because of the collaboration element between us. And things that I would typically be stuck on in the past has been things that we've been able to solve recently due to the collaboration element that we have, and that's been really, really good. And I've also noticed that a lot of the people that we've hired in our security research team, they have different personalities, perspectives, viewpoints, methodologies that ultimately are all complementing each other. For me, I personally tend to think very quickly and get through things as quickly as possible. But we also have people on our team that really go through very thoroughly and do take a lot of time to go through each individual controller or whatever is being mapped to an externally routable endpoint. I'm seeing that the methodologies that we have a lot of benefit. But yeah, ultimately, I do love security research. That is my favorite thing.
How do you split projects between people in the team? Do you all work on the same project, or is it individual and then you ask someone for help? How does it work?
It's quite dynamic. So at Asset Note, we see our security research team functioning in basically two major ways. One is the proactive security research, and the second is the reactive security research. So for us, if anything drops on the internet, if there's a vulnerability in XYZ product and there's no POC, our security research team is responsible in order to figure out what the POC is. So they will have to download the software, reverse engineer it, find the POC. And this also goes for all sorts of other vulnerabilities that are dropping on the internet. So if there are things that are dropping on the internet, our security research team is responsible for investigating it and adding a check to our platform. But we also have the reactive side. Now, the proactive side. And the proactive side is where we go out and we actually do security research ourselves and do original security research. To answer your question, when it comes to splitting up of the team, it really depends on what the priorities are. Sometimes we have a lot of work from the reactive side that requires a full resource to be focused on that reactive work, so that they will be doing that work and not the proactive work. But sometimes we can work together as a team. We do tend to give entire projects to an individual. So let's say, for example, we're auditing Moodle, for example. That would be assigned to a single security researcher here at Asset Note. And if they do find anything interesting or anything they want help with, then we're happy to collaborate and work with them at any given moment in time. But usually one person is leading the audit.
Okay, and that you kind of mentioned it because I've noticed from a lot of your blog posts, you mentioned, I don't know, recently Oracle Opera, a software that's used in millions of hotels, which I've never heard about. And I wanted to ask how you choose your targets, but I guess you just look at the software your customers use.
That's right. So it's a mix between two things. We look at the software that our customer uses, but we also look at any popular software, basically. Anything that is popular enough that maybe a future customer might use is something that's valuable to us. So it's not necessarily that our customer has to absolutely be running it for us to do security research on, but if there is a software product or some enterprise product that has a lot of popularity, or it is being used across many different segments and industries, we will definitely spend the time on it. Because one of the benefits for that is, we demo our product pretty much on the attack surface of any prospect. So if someone comes to us and they want to buy Asset Note, we're demoing on their attack surface. We're scanning their attack surface. So finding 0 days in popular products generally is basically the goal for our security research team, on top of any products that our customers are using. Oracle Opera is something that was actually found as a result of a live hacking event that was ran by BugCrowd last year. and they had a very famous resort in scope, a huge US resort, which had exposed Oracle Opera externally to the internet. So that was something that we looked at because of that specifically. But we ended up finding a few customers that had Oracle Opera exposed on the external internet as well. So one of the things that I love about what I do at AssetNode and the bug bounty world is a lot of the things that I'm doing is basically two birds with one stone. Any security research that I do has benefits from the AssetNode perspective and also from the bug bounty perspective, and vice versa, basically. Any research I do on the bug bounty side has benefits to AssetNode. So that's something that for me has been really, I've really been able to maximize my output with just doing 0-day research.
When you find a 0-day, apart from adding it to a detection rule or whatever, do you also monetize it in public bug bounty programs?
Yeah, we do. So we have a program internally at AssetNode, which is basically the bug bounty bonus program. So this is something that we currently offer our employees, where if you are doing research during work hours and work time using our resources and things like that, and you find a 0-day that affects a bunch of bug bounty programs, we will put it into a pool of money which gets split up as a bonus at the end of the year between the research team. So really for us, we've seen some really big bonuses in the last few years as a result of our team finding 0-days in many various popular products, which all goes towards this bug bounty bonus pool. So it gets split evenly. There's no special treatment for anyone on the team, and it's a great incentive for our researchers to stay and stick around at AssetNode.
Yeah, it sounds really cool, and also the even split probably helps you avoid any conflicts inside, because if it's uneven split, it's always someone has problems with it.
Yeah.
How did your hacking style change from when you were only doing bug bounty to now when you focus on the security research of 0-days?
Yeah, it's changed a lot actually. So when I was just doing bug bounty and I wasn't doing source code analysis, I found that I was spending a lot of time basically doing a lot of manual work that I didn't enjoy as much. For me now, source code analysis always presents a very specific challenge to me that that I know that there's more work to be done to be better at. Whereas the work that I was doing in manual bug bounty hunting, it often felt like it was not predictable, it wasn't deterministic, it was something that required a lot of effort and sometimes didn't lead to that much outcome. Whereas now, being more strategic about the targets that I pick, and being more strategic about how I break into something through security research is something that's led to an immense amount of bounties over the last couple years. And as I said earlier, with security research, I can knock two birds with one stone, and that's basically why I do it so much these days. But yeah, my hacking style, really one of the things that's probably the most obvious thing to me is that I focused a lot on client-side security in my first few years of bug bounty hunting. Immensely. I was on top of all the client-side security controls. I was doing a lot of work with different techniques with client-side security stuff. And then eventually I realized that, no, I don't really want to get these lower-end bug bounties anymore. And I don't want to spend this much time reporting on things that have not as much security impact as I think they should. I want to focus on the things that will actually compromise a target, that will actually lead to a full compromise. And after that point, I think I've only exclusively focused on server-side issues, I would say, in the last couple years. I'm still happy to report an XSS or whatever, but it doesn't excite me as much, unfortunately. It's not something that I get super excited about doing client-side security work. So these days, I've been focusing mainly on server-side security issues. And it's something that I think that it's like a specialization within a specialization kind of thing. It's not as if I'm not aware of all the client-side security techniques, but I'm definitely not as good as some of the bug bounty hunters and client-side security work that they are today. But it's the server-side security work that I have really honed and really become a lot better at.
What if the software your clients are using is not open source?
Yeah, so I've got multiple different techniques to discover software that's not open source. I mean, there's, one, I can look at it on Docker Hub if I can find someone that spun up a Docker image that has that software. I can look for trials if that's possible. Usually it isn't always possible. I can look at GitHub to see whether or not someone has put up any amount of code that resembles that software, or I can look at whether or not I can find S3 URLs that have that software, OVA files, things like that. I also look at Amazon Marketplace and Azure Marketplace, which often have software that's delivered as a pay-as-you-go sort of solution. I also look at community AMIs on Amazon, which often contain a bunch of different AMIs, maybe related to the software you're looking for. And yeah, I think lastly, and this is the one that I hate doing, is actually contacting the sales team and asking them for a trial. But that is something that you have to do sometimes in order to get that software.
Okay, so when you already have the software, how does your first hour of hacking look like?
My first hour of hacking looks like basically understanding what the software is written in. Well, actually, to be honest, the first hour is usually spent on setting that software up. And this is something this is something that every security researcher has to deal with. It's not a pretty process. It's actually a huge deterrent. Not many people enjoy doing this. I don't enjoy doing it, but you have to do it. Sometimes setting up the software can take a lot longer than even the first hour. If you try and set up any complex Oracle software, it will take you maybe days to set it up properly. So I really do feel for the sysadmins that set up this software within enterprises. It is difficult and boring work. But either way, after I've set up the software in the first hour, I spend my time understanding exactly what software is running on the system and understanding how it maps back to the executables or the jar files or to the code or whatever it may be. I pull down all of that from the system. I may have to disassemble or decompile it, and then after I do that, I try and understand all of the things that may be routable from a pre-authentication perspective. That's the first step for me usually. And just want to clarify, I mean, at Asset Note, we don't really care that much for post-authentication bugs. That's not something that we're very much so interested in. We're interested in pre-authentication bugs here at Asset Note. That's what our focus is. We're looking for pre-authentication critical bugs as our primary focus.
Okay, so you always want to run the software to which you're auditing. You never just look at the code?
Preferably, you always want to run the software if possible. Now, sometimes this isn't possible. Like the Oracle Opera work that we did not run that software because it would have taken an immense amount of time to set it up. And also for the Oracle Opera software, there were multiple zip files that were corrupt. So we even if we wanted to run the software, it wouldn't have been possible. But where possible, we will always try and run the software because we want dynamic debugging. We want to be able to debug the software, in real time. We want to be able to see all the different variables on the stack, all the different threads, and we want to be able to manipulate that as we're testing the application. We want to be able to set breakpoints in order to step through different parts of code to understand exactly what is happening when we send a request. And this is incredibly important because if you don't do this dynamic debugging component, sometimes you have to rely on your guesses and instinct, which honestly is not that good in complex software. There's just so much going on. There's just so much going on that you need to have more certainty around what is going on behind the scenes.
What tools are you using for this?
Yeah, so for .NET, I use Rider, which is a JetBrains product. And that has been really excellent for debugging .NET projects. That's something that I highly recommend anyone who's doing .NET work to use. And for Java, I use IntelliJ.
I think IntelliJ has also a feature to debug compiled jar files. Did you try it out in practice?
Yeah, so IntelliJ has a bunch of different ways of being able to debug things, but yeah, you can do that as well. Typically, I like loading up everything in source into IntelliJ and then getting it mapped to the Java debug port and then attaching to the process and things like that. So, I mean, that's all. There's so many ways of debugging. I know that some people prefer using Eclipse as well for Java debugging, but Personally, I've found that IntelliJ has been better to use from a debugging perspective. One of the things I've also heard recently was that CodeQL can now run on C# without having to compile the C#. So I haven't used that yet, but that is very interesting to me.
Speaking of CodeQL, do you use any tools to catch low-hanging fruit like SemGrep or CodeQL Scanner?
Yeah, so I don't use CodeQL that much. It's something that I would love to expand my knowledge on and start using a bit more frequently. But I use SemGrep a lot. So I've written a few custom SemGrep rules for certain things. I've also looked at some other SemGrep rules. Like I think one of the ones I've looked at is Eltim's custom SemGrep rules, which they have some custom Java rules and some other rules there. But yeah, I think that SemGrep is an incredibly valuable tool when it comes to finding this low-hanging fruit. Although I will say that SemGrep often does not always get things right. It does require a lot of human, I guess. It does require a little bit more of a investigation to understand whether or not SemGrep is actually truly correct about what it's found. But I mean, as a tool that assists me in source code auditing, I find it very valuable.
Okay, and when you get to manually auditing the code, how do you do this? Do you look at by functionality basis, or do you find things? How do you do it?
Yeah, so I usually focus on a list of known functions within any language that I know will lead to some sort of security issue. So if it's .NET or Java or whatever, I have a list of things that I grep for, that I look for, specifically to try and investigate whether or not they're reachable. But as I said earlier, one of the things that we focus on in the first hour of getting the software set up is finding all of the routes that are pre-authentication. And looking at these routes, you can often, at a glance, figure out what these functionalities may mean or may be wanting to do. I mean, if you have a controller that's like called download or something, that certainly sounds like it's interesting and worthwhile for you to investigate further. But yeah, I think my testing methodology is a bit dynamic. I mean, I have ADHD, so I think that I jump around a lot from place to place. I don't think that I am as methodological as most people that have a checklist or anything like that. I tend to rely a lot on gut instinct as well, and that's just been developed through doing a lot of source code auditing over the years. I mean, even professionally, when I was working at Bishop Fox, I was doing source code auditing as well there for a lot of different customers in different industries and different languages. But yeah, I think the more I source code audit, the better I tend to become at finding things quicker.
When new researchers come to work with you, what are the mistakes you see them doing at the beginning?
Well, I think that one of the big mistakes can often be giving up on a target too early. So one of the things that I've seen is, like a researcher will say, I've audited it, there's no security issues. And this is like maybe 2 days after you've assigned them the project or something, right? And honestly, for a lot of the really large enterprise software that we're looking at, it's a very grueling process, and it requires a lot of boring things to be done before you find that gold or those gems. And sometimes it's a matter of uncovering attack surface that you maybe didn't know existed in the first place, or maybe you didn't know where to look for that attack surface because of some gaps in your knowledge about how the product is operating or deployed. So I think the number one mistake that I see from security researchers that we've hired, or just in general, is that they can give up after a short period of time without actually having enough certainty that they've covered everything inside the application.
How much time do you usually spend before you conclude there are no bugs?
Around 1 week of full-time time is 1 to 2 weeks of full-time work. Sometimes that's between 3 people, so 3 people for 1 week of full-time is usually a pretty decent indicator. If we haven't found anything after the 1 week, then we'll probably look back at that product again in the future. We'll set up a calendar invite, maybe look at it in a year or something.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of time, especially that you only look at the unauthenticated part, which is probably not even half of the application most of the time.
We are happy to find things post authentication, but every time we find things post authentication, we usually then spend the rest of the time looking for an authentication bypass. That's usually
Okay.
what we do. So if we find stuff that's post auth, it's fine, but we will spend a lot of time looking for an auth bypass.
What screams to you, this software has a lot of bugs?
Any Java monolith project, anything that has 20 plus servlets defined in a web.xml file, I'm sure has something wrong with it.
Okay. When you're learning something, when you're learning hacking or specific technology, like you specialize in .NET, after a relatively short time, you get to a point where you can no longer just find a tutorial in the internet about something. How do you learn it further?
I tend to make C# projects for whatever I'm looking at. So, I mean, there's been quite a lot of research in .NET that still is beyond me in many ways. For example, there's a lot of research from Jang that he recently found in RCE and Microsoft SharePoint, and there's still stuff like that in .NET that's very esoteric and sometimes difficult to understand. And I find that research, the only way to fully understand it is by setting up some sort of environment that's similar to what the researcher had and exploiting that vulnerability step by step. Now, I haven't had the chance to do that for Jang's vulnerability, but I have done this in the past. I have exploited vulnerabilities in the past which I didn't fully understand, and I've written blog posts about them as well. So one of the ones that really caught my attention was a authentication bypass vulnerability, I think in VMware Workspace ONE Access, which I reverse engineered and recreated to understand it better, and wrote a blog post about. So my opinion is just recreate these vulnerabilities from researchers that you don't understand so you can actually understand them.
Do you think for beginners that are just starting with code review, it's the same learning method or there is something easier for them?
Well, if you're starting with code review, I don't think this is something that would even concern you as much. The things that I'm talking about are probably for the people that have already done a lot of work in code review and want to get even better. It's one of those weird things that once you become good at something, you start looking at the people that are even better than you, and there's such a huge gap between being pretty good at something and being the best at something. So I think for people who are beginning, there are a ton of code review exercises on Pentester Lab, but honestly, my recommendation still is to look at a real life product that's being used and auditing that product and that source code of that product. Because in my opinion, that's how you learn the most.
If you only wanted to prioritize for earning a bug bounty, how would you hunt today?
If I wanted to only earn bug bounty, how would I hunt today? Probably a bit of a hybrid approach. So basically what I'm doing right now, I mean, I'm still using automation in a lot of my bug bounty work, but I'm also doing a lot of manual bug bounty work as well, and I'm also doing security research. My recommendation is you split up your time between those three things. So manual work, reconnaissance-based automation, and security research.
Okay. Who do you think going full-time bug bounty will be good for?
I think it would be good for someone that has a lifestyle that doesn't require too much certainty around when and what you're going to get paid. But at the same time, honestly, if you're very good at bug bounties and you've proven to yourself that you're very good at it and you make a lot of money, then you're an ideal candidate to go full-time. But I think what a lot of people don't understand is that in order to be that good at bug bounties, you have really got to spend a lot of time and really master a lot of different things in order to get there. And one of the things that I am afraid that some of the people getting into the bug bounty scene might be thinking is, oh, like I can probably do this full time and make a ton of money, or whatever. But usually all the people that I've seen who are successful that are full time have spent a ridiculous amount of time becoming really good at their trade craft.
How do you prepare for live hacking events?
Well, I just love collaborating with people. So I just hang out with a lot of people that are similarly passionate about hacking, and we just enjoy hacking things together. It's a pretty fair and easy system. Everyone gets splits evenly if they collaborate. And yeah, everyone's quite fun to work with. I've just been able to build a really nice network over the last couple of years that we tend to knock ideas around with each other, and we find a lot of different things that wouldn't have been possible if we were just working alone. So for preparation for live hacking events, I mean, I try my best to just take it easy and not take it too seriously, but at the same time, I do try to prepare well in advance. So if I have notification of a live hacking event, I'm spending a ton of time before the event even starts to try and find vulnerabilities.
That's awesome. And you mentioned collaboration here. How do you find people that you collaborate with?
Completely organically. So either they've reached out to me or I've reached out to them at some point. There are some hackers that I'm particularly interested in collaborating with that I've reached out to over the years, and I've been able to form really good relationships. One of the things that I will mention about collaboration is that collaboration is not just the act of doing some technical work with someone so you can get paid some amount of money. It's about building real relationships with people. And one of the things that I care about the most in the hacker community is building real relationships with everyone around me in the bug bounty space that have not that much to do with any money or any transactional element or anything like that. I tend to build relationships first and then choose to collaborate after that. After I've realized that such and such person is a good person, I want to spend more time with them, and I think that they're good at certain things, then I will pull them into collaborations with myself, or they will pull me into collaborations with what they're doing.
What do you think people should watch out for when collaborating with others?
I think one of the things that you should watch out for is just really knowing the person that you're collaborating with before choosing to collaborate with them. Because if the person you're collaborating with has a certain personality that, it can go wrong easily if that person doesn't understand from the beginning what the splits are. If that person thinks that they're entitled to something more than what they're entitled to, if that person is maybe jealous or greedy or whatever, it can be quite tricky to resolve those disputes and conflicts. So before you start working with someone, really try and understand who they are as a person before you start, collaborating technically with them and seeing whether or not they, can find stuff for you or with you. But I don't know. I think I have collaborated with people time to time that have just randomly reached out to me, but I'm certainly not the type of person that, withholds bounties or asks for more cut or whatever that may be, unless we both agree on it from the very beginning.
Okay. Okay. Let's now switch to a bit different topic. You have an awesome blog at AssetNote. It's one of the best, if not, in my opinion, the best source of articles in the industry, because you always also share the process of finding the bug, some technical tips. It's much more than just write up of the bug. And the question is, why to share your knowledge and why to disclose your techniques to the public?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I grew up on public, free content that was out there in the wild. Without the goodwill nature of everyone in this world that has produced content that they've put out for the world, for them to learn, I wouldn't be here today. And I wouldn't have the privilege that I have to be able to audit this software and find these vulnerabilities. And to me, it's always been about giving back to this ideology that, I'm not afraid of sharing things. I'm not afraid of sharing my techniques and sharing how I got to some place or another. I think that really, if I'm able to educate people through my content, through my words, then that is a success for me. And again, like, one of the things that our blog posts have been phenomenal for is really getting the word out there of the talent and skill that we have at our company and what we're capable of from a security research perspective. The work that we do is in many ways it resembles our security research team, and we want to be proud of the work that we put out there, and that's why we spend a lot of time in actually trying to explain our steps in how we found what we did. I think that whoever is scared of competition and chooses not to share content because of competition is they themselves not that competitive. Because the world, I mean, if people really want to learn something, they will learn it, and people are going to compete with you either way. If you're really that worried about competition, then and you don't want to share things, then that's fine. That's your choice. But I would much rather always be learning. And even if I release things that have a lot of tips or tricks or whatever, I am always looking for our team and myself to go beyond that the next time.
Do you sometimes have problems because of disclosing the vulnerabilities on your blog post? Because sometimes you post the timeline in the blog post, and sometimes you mention some arguments with the company that maybe they didn't fix the bug or something like this.
Yeah, it does happen. We have had a few instances where companies have either refuted the bug, or they've either claimed that what we reported was not real, or in many cases we've also had vendors that just take a lot longer than the 90-day timeline in order to resolve the bug as well. I mean, this is something that is always a problem with vulnerability and security research, but for us, we tend to be lenient to the vendor if they have made any sort of progress. So if we know that for a fact the vendor has started working on a fix or has done some significant work on the fix, then we're more lenient to wait more than the 90 days to release the blog post. One of the things that I've noticed as well with a lot of the vulnerabilities that we find, as you know, we focus on critical pre-authentication vulnerabilities. Almost all of our vulnerabilities end up being exploited by threat actors, which is, really something that sucks. But at the same time, we are following our coordinated disclosure process. We are making sure that the vendors have an ample amount of time to fix. We are not selling any of our vulnerabilities to zero-day brokers or the secondary market or the black market or anything like that. We're pretty much playing this whole zero-day disclosure game as carefully and responsibly as we can, which, for us, even though we're doing that, we see our bugs being picked up by, threat actors in Russia and China and end up on the CISA most known exploited vulnerabilities lists and stuff like that. So it is really tricky. It is something that, we think about quite a lot, but we really make a good faith effort to work with the vendor to help them get as many people patched as possible.
What are some tips for people reporting 0 days on how to make the process as smooth as possible on our side?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're reporting any zero-day vulnerabilities, if that product that you're reporting to has a bug bounty program, if you plan to disclose that vulnerability, do not report it through the bug bounty program. Absolutely do not. Because if you report it through the bug bounty program, you are accepting the code of conduct and the terms and conditions of that platform, which basically says that you cannot disclose that vulnerability without explicit consent from the customer. If you want to be able to disclose your vulnerabilities and you're finding 0 days in whatever it may be, and they have a bug bounty, report it via email. And when you report it via email, attach a coordinated disclosure policy at the top of the bug report. This policy usually goes by something like, you have 90 days to fix the issue, or 30 days after patch is when we will release the blog post. So after 90 days or 30 days after patch, we'll release, an article or blog post or whatever, our advisory. That's usually the industry standard terms for vulnerability disclosure. And these timelines have been solidified by, companies like Google with Project Zero. So this is based off those industry standards.
Is there maybe a link somewhere to a policy that you can say you can link in the report for the team to see, or you just say that you will disclose it in 90 days or 30 days after the patch, and that's all it is?
Yeah, so the policy I mean, it's up to you. If you have a different policy, you can try and come up with a different policy, but you can just copy the one that's from Google Project Zero as a starting point. But generally, I've also seen some hackers do something where it's like, once the vulnerability is remediated, we will publish, for example. I've seen hackers that have done things like that as well. So it really depends what you're comfortable with from a policy perspective. But if you're going to be reporting 0 days, you need to be attaching these policies to the top of your vulnerability reports, each one.
Yeah, obviously here we assume that publishing a blog post is more important for us than getting a bounty, because then you're not getting a bounty.
Right. So this is definitely assuming that getting a bounty is less important. But a lot of the hackers that I work with these days, they're not as much interested in the bug bounty element as they are in the idea of documenting their work and publishing their work, which is fine. I mean, if you're just looking for the bug bounty, that's okay. And look, there's also a possibility that if you report it via a bug bounty program, they might still be open for you to publish your work. But that is completely dependent on them approving the disclosure request.
Yeah, and there are, I think, few companies that we know that always disclose bugs, like, I don't know, GitLab, Google, and so on, but not that many, especially when it's like commercial software.
Yeah.
You mentioned here your team a lot. What are some things that you pay attention to when recruiting security researchers?
Yeah, actually, one of the things I've found with a lot of the security researchers that we've recruited over the last few years is they have really good skills in CTFs. They've done extremely well playing for CTF teams, and they've also ran CTFs or made challenges in CTFs that have really caught my attention. So this has been a constant theme with some of the security researchers that we've hired. But it does require a very specific person to be interested in what we do, and we also have a very rigorous technical interview process for the security researchers that involves them finding 0 days in a number of different locations inside the product.
How about things like certifications?
I don't really look at certifications. I don't look at certifications. I don't look at university degree. I don't look at age either. I mainly look at whether or not they are enthusiastic. They know what they're talking about. They understand different elements of source code analysis and reverse engineering. And most importantly, if they can pass a technical take-home interview.
How does it look like, out of curiosity?
It's a enterprise product that has several 0 days inside. Some 0 days are much more difficult to find than others, and we give them a week, and they're able to spin up a Docker container with this enterprise software, and they have a week to find as much as they can, and then they then they send in their report, which is just in Markdown. We review all of their findings, and depending on what they've found, they either pass or fail. I mean, again, this interview is something that's focused primarily on the pre-auth attack surface. We have had some cases where people have focused on things that were post-authentication, but unfortunately, for this interview, we really need someone to find all the pre-auth stuff. There's a lot of pre-auth stuff. And there's varying degrees of complexity with the vulnerabilities. The take-home assessment is not supposed to be so difficult that you give up, but for us to assess how capable you are, it will depend on whether or not you've discovered some of the more deeper inherent issues with the application that are maybe 5 or 6 layers deep within the application. We do assess based off this technical take-home interview, but it is something that we heavily rely on for our security researcher interviews.
In general, not only for security researchers, but for bug bounty hunters, pen testers, and pretty much everyone in security, what skills do you think people should learn to not be replaced by AI soon?
Patience, dedication, and persistence. Some of these skills are not necessarily things that can be transferred to an AI. I mean, you can try, and to be honest, using AI for security source code review, I've found that it often misses things that are a bit tricky, or it hallucinates about things that don't exist. So we're not quite there yet, but I'm not saying that we won't be there yet. I'm just saying that with the current technologies that I've been playing around with AI, it's not just quite there yet when it comes to discovering some of the more esoteric, complex vulnerabilities that humans still need to be involved to discover. But yeah, I mean, really, I think that the advice to not be replaced by AI is the same as what I'd give 5 years ago, which is just focus on what you're passionate about and become the best at it as you can possibly be. Which, if it's security source code auditing, to just become the best at it as you can possibly be. Because even if there's an AI, someone will still need to make sense of those things that the AI produces.
How have you been trying to introduce AI to your job?
I've been using it sometimes for engineering work. So I use Copilot and I use ChatGPT for different things. But I also have been trying to use it for some vulnerability analysis. Now, it's not been that good because every time I've done vulnerability analysis with AI, I've found that it's not always been super accurate, at least ChatGPT. It's sometimes given me a bunch of leads that didn't actually have any merit. So wasted a bit of time following those leads and trying to exploit them. Or they weren't practical. They weren't things that would be feasible to do. Even if it was technically a vulnerability, they weren't possible. So I'm not quite convinced yet when it comes to discovering vulnerabilities with AI, but I'm sure that's going to change within the next 6 to 12 months, given how fast everything's moving.
How do you think it will look in 5 years?
I think, honestly, we will be able to provide a source code repository of some sort and see all of the different issues that it has. And ideally, we'll be able to ask the AI questions. So we'll be able to say, how does all the authentication and authorization work? How does all of the, what are all of the pre-authentication routes? What are all the post-authentication routes? Where are all the HTTP clients? Things like that. But I'm not sure that AI is just quite there yet for that. I think it will be in some time.
Yeah, I think taking the source code and asking AI to list as routes available before authentication should be possible relatively soon, I would say, because it seems like a doable job, but I think it will take a long time so AI can actually understand the complex software, especially with like different components and different code bases. It will never completely replace manual hackers.
Yeah, and look, like one of the softwares that we're looking at right now is like 11 GB. So that's huge. I don't see us feeding that into a large language model anytime soon, right? Like there's a lot of complex software out there, so we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm very curious. Thank you so much for this interview. But before I let you go, what are your plans for the rest of this year?
My plans? Well, I'll be going to the London live hacking event later this year in June. And besides that, I think I'll be going to Singapore and a few other places, probably having a New Year's party here in Brisbane at the end of the year. But yeah, that's most of my plans. I think when it comes to hacking and stuff, I mean, continuing to write up blog posts and release cool vulnerability research for different enterprise products. So I'm really looking forward to that. And yeah, I just progressing Asset Node. I mean, we've been doing this for 4.5 years, and we're looking forward to what the future has in for us.
Awesome. I definitely cheer you up for creating the blog posts because they are really the best, I think, source of learning code review. We'll make sure to link this for people in the description. And where should people go to follow you in social media?
Just Twitter. Twitter's really good, or LinkedIn, but either one is good. I mean, I'm on Twitter and I post stuff time to time, but yeah, if you ever have any questions on source code review, just reach out to me. My DMs are open. I may not be able to respond to everyone, but I'm happy to help if it's a serious source code review inquiry, something that someone's actually worked on or has worked through and has some legitimate question. I'm happy to answer.
Okay, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Bye.
What a fantastic interview. Here, Shubs mentioned that for security research, he doesn't really focus on client-side issues, but for bug bounty, they can be great. And in the last episode of Bug Bounty Report Discussed podcast, I interviewed Yusuf Shimuda, who has been top 1 on Bug Bounty Facebook's leaderboard for 3 consecutive years. If you want to hear another episode of the podcast, I recommend you this one. For now, thank you for listening and goodbye.